Thank you to all my channel members, including my fan appreciation level members and my contributor level members, for helping support the YouTube channel.
Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book, The Man from St. Petersburg, by Ken Follett. This is a historical fiction thriller from him. I've read several of his historical fiction epics, like all of his Kingsbridge books and his new release, Circle of Days. Those were all very entertaining. And I've also been trying to get into his thrillers. And I read two of his early thrillers. I read The Modigliani Scandal, which was entertaining. It's his weakest, it's weaker than his historical fictions, but it's an entertaining book. It's about a book about art. And then he had the book Paper Money, which I did not care for whatsoever. I thought this was a very poor book. So his thrillers were not necessarily hitting on all the cylinders for me, but I heard good things about The Man from St. Petersburg, and so I decided to give it a try. And it is an absolutely delightful book. It is well-paced. It has great story. It has some great characters, a good cast. It's got some really interesting story beats. Some of it might be predictable to some people, but I really liked where Ken Follett went with this book. This book is set in 1914 in England. It is about this English family that is kind of, they're in the nobility. They're in the House of Lords. The dad is, and the dad is asked by the government to bring in a Russian prince who's actually a distant relation, because the nobility in Europe is all distantly related. Anyway, they're going to bring in this prince from Russia to help negotiate that if England goes to war, that Russia would join them in the war, which would later on be World War I. And so it's about the English trying to negotiate with the Russians, but these Russian anarchists who are hoping to cause communism and hoping to cause the communist revolution in Russia end up sending their own assassin to try and murder the Russian prince, so that it will cause England and Russia not to fight. It will make Russia not want to work with England. That's basically the premise. They're trying to do like it's kind of set up like an alternate, like what if it wasn't Archduke Ferdinand that was murdered, but it was someone else. Although I will say the Archduke Ferdinand, storyline does show up here. And this book weaves in actual historical events and the historical politics while also being its own story. So all the stuff about the alliances and about Germany and France and having all their stuff since, the Franco-Prussian War, and all the stuff happening in Serbia and with the Ottomans and with the Bosnians and with Austria-Hungary, all that stuff is like discussed in the background. But what this book is, at its heart, is it is a book about the assassin Felix, who is trying to murder the Russian prince, and he gets entangled with the Walden family. You have Stephen, who's the father, you have Lydia, who's the mother, and you have Charlotte, who's their daughter. Charlotte is she's just about to turn 18. And you have Lydia and Stephen are, Stephen's this member of the House of Lords. Lydia is this Russian woman who married Stephen and became part of the English nobility, and it's about their entanglement, and it's about them trying to stop Felix, but also the daughter kind of being influenced by Felix and ending up kind of befriending him in a way. And there's some great interesting twists and stuff. And so the book is a lot more cohesive than a lot of his other books. In fact, I am so thankful that when you compare this to Paper Money is a really short book where there's no cohesiveness, where it's all spread out. There's all different types of plot lines. It's so hard to follow everything and keep track of everything. The Man from St. Petersburg is a longer book. It's not that much longer, but it's a longer book, and it actually has a cohesive story. It has a good framework, good characters. You don't feel like you're jumping around plotline-wise. It's very limited, and it's deliberate in which characters you're following. I will also say this is probably the most appropriate Ken Follett book. there's still some R-rated stuff in this book, and it was frustrating because I went like 100 pages, and I was like, man, this book's pretty appropriate so far. And then I went, heck yeah, of course he threw it, and of course he does, because he's Ken Follett, because he can't help himself, because he doesn't know how to write appropriate stuff. That being said, comparatively, this is much more appropriate than his other works. And there's, you could probably just skip the few pages when it happens. It actually isn't, it's only like, I think, 2 sequences in this whole book. And they're actually quite shorter than his other sequences. So if you could skip that, you'll be fine with this book, I think. Although I will say it is, I would call it R-rated. Although there's a lot less language than he normally has. Maybe that's because it's set in like 1914 high society where they, kind of against language. Anyway, it's very atmospheric. It's very much the book. I figured actually based off the cover and based off of the title, I thought it was going to take place in Russia. And there's some flashbacks to Russia, but almost the entire book takes place in London in the summer. So I would have picked maybe a different cover, perhaps something that matches better. But really, I really had a blast with this book. The history nerd, I'm actually teaching world history this year, and as I'm reading this, I'm teaching World War I. We just taught about, Archduke Ferdinand and the alliance system. We talked about all that stuff I mentioned earlier, and so I actually really enjoyed being like, ooh, I love how you brought in that element of history. And then there's a few details that he brings up in here, and I thought, ooh, I need to Google that. And I started reading stuff on Google and on other websites, and I was like, wait a second, that's real? That's an actual real thing? And it was just, it made the history nerd in me kind of geek out, and it made it fun. I love it when you can learn new information and it happen in a fun way. That's exactly what this book does. So yes, I absolutely loved The Man from St. Petersburg. I would give it a 9 out of 10. The only things I would fix are, I think that he makes it a little bit too obvious when he gets ready for the big reveal. I think that he spent too much time setting that up, and there's not as many action scenes in this as you'd think. It doesn't have, it kind of pumps up at the end, but it never had the propulsiveness of his other endings, and so it loses a little bit for that. But in terms of an entertaining story, cohesive, great characters, all that stuff, I think, and great themes, I think that he nailed everything with that. So this Man's from St. Petersburg, 9 out of 10, very good book from Ken Follett. And I'm so glad that this thriller of his I loved, albeit it is a historical fiction thriller, but I love that there's a thriller of his that I'm a big fan of. So I can't wait to read more Ken Follett novels after this. Probably not anymore for 2025. I think I'm tapped out for 2025. 2026, though, I have several Ken Folletts on deck because I have a lot on my shelves yet to get to. So if you've read this book, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.